Hi there, my name's Mothia. I'm really sorry that I can't be there with you. Paul invited me to give a talk to you on radical local democracy for the Cornwall Cooperative Party Cornwall branch meeting. And I'm really sorry I can't be there with you, but I thought I'd do what I can to just to present some of the ideas that I've spoken to Paul about through the work that I've been doing, both with New Economy Law, which is the legal innovation lab that I'm setting up after having worked as a solicitor in London on planning, and it was the Occupy movement itself, which actually gave me a different sort of perspective on how democracy can be done differently. And Extinction Rebellion, which is where I met Paul, has been sort of the sort of current opening into looking at how radical democracy can be done differently. And I'd like to just to explain a bit of what that means. So when we're speaking about radical local democracy, this is just an overview here, just to compare it with what is meant by local democracy. I'll speak a little bit about the context for why it's felt that we need to move to this kind of model of a more radical model of democracy, local democracy, and what types of democratic innovation there are, or that I know of myself, that have been happening, including citizens' assembly, which is one of the key demands of Extinction Rebellion. So yeah, local democracy versus what do we mean by local democracy and against a more radical model of local democracy. I've put two pictures here of a sort of comparison between one model of justice, as we see it there, the standard model of the Lady Justice blindfolded, sword in one hand, and the balance of right and wrong on the other, against this painting which an artist has produced to give a different idea of justice, where it's more about the embodied level of and life-orientated, the nourishing, the restoration of self, of community. And that gives a sort of idea of how one model of democracy that we have at the moment is where we are not the usual model of local democracy, where we have local parties, we have the Labour councillors and Conservative councillors, all often fighting against each other, a very adversarial system. And what should be happening is we should be coming to a model of what kind of place and community do we want at a local level, and instead what often happens is the party politics gets in the way. So as we've seen with Brexit, particularly at the moment, how toxic that can become when the allegiance to a party becomes more important than bringing into effect policies that actually meet the needs of local people. So this divide and conquer mentality is something that's become quite toxic. And how can we move to a more life-orientated way of understanding or embodying our democratic systems? The context for the need for that, of course, this is what Extinction Rebellion is about, is the IPCC report, the latest element of describing how we are now clearly moving into a climate emergency. The report that was published by the Interpanel on Climate Change, saying we've got a maximum of 12 years to make a change, to reduce emissions, to meet temperature rises of 1.5 degrees and the tipping points themselves could be, nobody knows exactly where they are, but they could be it could be far closer than one, than even in their cautious estimates. So we need to radically overhaul the way our existing economic system works, which is growth at all costs, trumping ecological goods, and so that model for growth needs to be overturned, and we need to move to this emergency model. So if our trajectory is going this way towards the tipping point, how do we put on those brakes so that we can actually turn the trajectory and start moving in a direction that is actually meets the planetary boundaries and also meets the standards of social justice as well. The other aspects of the need, and here the picture I've just put it here is about something cracking. That's what it feels like, at least for me, and I'm sure many other people. The systems that we have, the trusted institutions themselves, are breaking down. Europe, and Brexit being one symptom of that, of the far right as well. There are elections in Europe coming in May, and there are huge concerns that the alt-right have actually, though the far right have themselves gathered force, and that there could be a huge shift in the dynamics in European politics so that come May. Brexit, well, we know all about that, and I don't want to say more about that right now, but we can see how toxic that is and how it's actually a symptom of something that's breaking down. Again, the US, the politics of Trump, the populism that has arisen, not just in Trump, but in other countries, in Europe, in Italy, in Hungary. There are politicians and politics which are coming up, which are just pandering to, in a way, the worst instincts of that we have. The fears that we have. It's pandering a lot to the fears of, and by pandering to that, it feels like those very values that brought Europe to, brought us to this understanding of democracy, of equality. That is something that's breaking down. And the other picture I've put in here is just to say, well, when something is cracking, like in the pavement, there is also life that comes through those cracks. And that's where the radical models are coming through, it seems, and it's to pay attention to what's happening and where that's happening. And that's what I just want to quickly just talk about here in terms of what actually is happening in the country where new things are happening. So Frome is a town council which a few years ago got fed up with the way that party politics was being done between Labour and Conservative councillors, and at those elections, I think in 10 years ago now, that they decided to stand as independents, and Peter McFadden was the first mayor, and they all unanimously got elected, and through that independence they were able to bring huge changes in the way that the politics was being done. So, for example, the 3-minute rule where the public can speak, they got rid of that. All this is just in standing orders, so the standing orders can change, and that's what they did. They changed the rule book of the processes and procedures for how they wanted to govern themselves, and they began listening to the people, to the local people, and opened it up in a people's assembly style, a bit like that picture there, where round tables, much more friendly, much more open. Torridge Common Ground is not a party, but a group of independents, similar to Frome, but standing this time at district level in North Devon, both district and town level for the May elections. And they're following very much the model in Frome. So Frome has begun a sort of the seed of a number of councils actually that are beginning, or a number of communities that are beginning to actually look at how they can bring politics or the power of structural change in politics into their communities. But Fastly is another community in Devon which has also done that. And speaking with Peter McFadden a couple of weeks ago in Torridge, where we both give a talk, Peter said he's got a list of at least 20 council or 20 communities which are beginning to implement the flat pack democracy method that Froome innovated with. Citizens Assembly, that's a huge new, not new, but a huge something that's coming into the public imagination a lot because of Extinction Rebellion. It's its third demand. The three demands Extinction Rebellion has is for the government to tell the truth about the seriousness and the urgency of climate collapse. And then the second demand is that that policies are put in place to reverse the policies that are meaning that we are not going to meet the carbon emission targets to keep temperatures within up to as a maximum 1.5 degrees. The third demand is that a citizen assembly should oversee the changes to carry that out, to carry out the policies that will meet those the carbon emission targets to keep temperatures to 1.5 degrees. Now, the main thing about citizen assemblies that is the difference between people's assemblies and citizen assembly. People's assemblies are very informal gatherings. Anybody can do a people's assembly. There's a particular method. They came out of the Occupy movement in particular, and it was a way to enable discussions in a very open way in small groups. The citizen assembly is more formal, and it is trying to present a different way to representative democracy, which now, as we've seen in Brexit, is just not working. And you could say it's arguable that it's not working because of huge changes in the way that we gather information, say through social media, etc. So we already have that information at hand, and there is an immediate response that needs to be had, rather than the much slower way that representative democracy was working, where one person represents a whole district, a whole constituency. And the toxicity comes from that person having so much power, having been elected. Whereas sortition is saying, well, let's not have politicians in that way. Let's have, just as if we have a jury system where there's a random selection of ordinary citizens, widen that so that a random selection of citizens that is representative of the demographics of the country as a whole get to come together to decide on big issues that are crucial to that often they've been used where there's been a lot of controversy over an issue, so that politicians don't actually have to make that decision. So, for example, in Ireland, with the Citizen Assembly there, that was over over abortion, whether the ban on abortion should remain within the constitution. And rather than having the politicians deciding on that such a hot topic that had such controversy, they formed the Citizens Assembly. And over a period of 2 years, they brought in experts. So the experts themselves aren't the decision makers. The experts are there just to inform the citizens themselves, who can who deliberate. So the idea is to have to begin a form of deliberative democracy rather than representative democracy, so that ordinary citizens are seen as holders, have the capacity to make decisions if they are informed in a way that is comprehensive. And so that's what happened in Ireland, and there was over that process, the decision was the decision was made to lift the ban on abortion, and that was recommended to the Irish Parliament, who then the Irish Assembly, and they held a referendum, and the referendum was passed without much dissent, because it was evidence, because it was the Citizen Assembly had come to that conclusion themselves, and there was a trust by the electorate in the decision of that citizen assembly, because it was formed of ordinary people chosen by random, which is an important aspect. That it was there's no power dynamics involved in that. So there hasn't been a citizen assembly at that scale in England. There was a small Brexit citizen assembly that happened when Brexit Article 50 was triggered, but it didn't really capture much imagination in the same way that the Irish one did. And there has been a couple of small citizen assembly on social care, but held by parliamentary committees. So it's already there in the agenda, and through what's happened with Brexit, there's been even more sort of calls for a citizen assembly around Brexit, and also through Extinction Rebellion. So it's gathered a lot of momentum, and it feels like that the day for citizen assembly is fast approaching. So those were the kind of the kind of main innovations that I just wanted to talk about sort of briefly here. And there's this line that I love from Leonard Cohen about saying that there's a crack in everything, that's where the light gets in. It's one of his songs, and it's that sense that we are seeing a lot of things breaking down, but we are also seeing, for example, with Extinction Rebellion, that people are rising up. That light can come through these cracks, and it's if we gather ourselves together, which is what I guess the cooperative movement is about coming together as ordinary people, finding our own voice, finding ways in which we can organise ourselves. And the People's Assembly is a really great way of organising ourselves in community to come to decisions that can move things forward and learn to play a different game. And I think that's an important thing, that we've grown up with one particular way of democracy, representative democracy, but we've made these rules ourselves over time, and these rules can be changed. And as things break down more and more, the capacity to begin to think creatively about new rules becomes ever stronger and ever better and ever more credible an opportunity. So I hope that's useful anyway, just over the last, for your conference. And I've got my contact details there. Paul has my details, and I'd love to follow up at some point to hear how this landed with you, to see whether there are anything in there that you want to take to that you might want to take to the national conference in terms of particular policies around a more radical way of doing democracy. Thank you.